What if I told you that the world you know, the languages you speak, the art you admire, even the way societies are governed, was shaped by ancient collisions of cultures so profound, their echoes still ripple through time? Picture this: a Greek statue stands in an Indian temple, its curls sculpted in the style of Apollo, but its serene smile unmistakably Buddha. A Roman emperor prays to a god who bears the head of an Egyptian falcon, yet wears the armor of a conquering hero. These aren't accidents of history, they're deliberate, breathtaking fusions, moments when civilizations didn't just meet but melded, creating something entirely new. This is cultural syncretism, the alchemy of human connection that transformed empires and, in ways you might not expect, still shapes your daily life. Think about the last time you sipped coffee while scrolling through social media. That coffee, its roots trace back to Sufi mystics in Yemen, the alphabet on your screen. A descendant of Phoenician traders' script, adapted by Greeks, then Romans, now glowing on your device. Everywhere we look, the past whispers stories of exchange of ideas, beliefs, and traditions that refuse to stay within borders. But here's what's truly astonishing. These ancient blends weren't just about borrowing. They were acts of reinvention. When Alexander the Great marched into Persia, he didn't erase its culture. He fused it with his own, creating a Hellenistic world where Egyptian gods gained Greek names and Persian architects inspired Roman domes. These weren't compromises, they were revolutions. So why does this matter to you? Because the challenges we face today navigating a globalized world, bridging divides, preserving identity while embracing change, are challenges these ancient empires faced too. Their solutions, bold, creative, sometimes messy syntheses that gave us everything from the Silk Road spice routes to the very concept of multicultural cities. Over the next minutes, we'll wander through bustling bazaars of ideas where Zen Buddhism met Taoist philosophy, where Moorish Spain became a beacon of scientific progress, and where the threads of these ancient fusions weave into the fabric of our modern lives. This isn't just history, it's a mirror and a map, ready to see how the past's most daring cultural experiments might just hold the keys to our future. Let's begin. Cultural syncretism isn't just about swapping recipes or borrowing fashion trends. It's the moment when two cultures collide so powerfully that they spark something neither could have created alone. Imagine a painter mixing colors on a palette. Blue and yellow don't just sit side by side, they become green, something entirely new. That's syncretism. Take the Greco-Buddhist art of ancient Gandhara, where the serene face of Buddha suddenly wore the chiseled features of a Greek god, draped in robes that flowed like a Roman toga. This wasn't a haphazard mashup, it was a deliberate reinvention, a way to make Buddhist teachings resonate with communities already steeped in Hellenistic traditions. But here's where it gets fascinating. Syncretism wasn't just about art or religion. It was a tool of empire. When the Romans encountered Mithras, a Persian god of light, they didn't merely add him to their pantheon, they reimagined him. Mithraism became a soldier's faith, complete with underground temples and initiation rites that mirrored Roman military discipline. This wasn't cultural surrender, it was strategic alchemy, a way to bind diverse peoples under a shared symbolic language. Even language itself transformed through syncretism. The Arabic script you see in mosques from Istanbul to Jakarta, it evolved from Nabatean traders' writing, which itself borrowed from Aramaic, creating a visual bridge across continents. What makes syncretism so different from simple borrowing is the element of reinvention. When Spanish colonizers brought Catholicism to the Americas, indigenous communities didn't just adopt the new faith, they wove it into their own cosmologies. The Virgin of Guadalupe became Tonantzin, an earth goddess in a new guise. This wasn't a loss of identity, it was a survival strategy, a way to preserve sacred truths under a changed sky. Syncretism thrives in these liminal spaces where power dynamics, creativity, and necessity collide. It's not the erasure of culture, but its evolution, proof that human identity is far more fluid and far more resilient than borders might suggest. And perhaps that's the most enduring lesson of syncretism. It reveals how cultures don't just clash, they converse. The spices in your curry, the chords in your favorite song, even the way your city blends architectural styles, they are all whispers of ancient dialogues that refuse to end. These fusions weren't tidy or predictable. They were messy, contested, and alive with possibility, much like the world we navigate today. Trade routes were the original social networks, threads of connection stitching distant worlds together long before ships could cross oceans in weeks or messages could fly at the speed of light. Picture a caravan trudging through the Taklamakan Desert, its camels laden not just with bolts of silk and sacks of pepper, but with something far more precious, the intangible cargo of culture. A Buddhist monk hitching a ride might teach meditation techniques to a Persian merchant. A Chinese potter could sketch a new design inspired by Greek motifs seen in a marketplace. These weren't mere transactions, they were live-streamed cultural exchanges happening in real time across thousands of miles. Take the Silk Road's most unexpected export, paper. Invented in China around 105 BCE, it didn't just revolutionize record-keeping, it became a canvas for syncretism. By the 8th century, paper mills in Samarkand were producing sheets that carried Arabic calligraphy alongside Buddhist sutras, while Persian poets used the same medium to preserve verses that would later inspire Renaissance thinkers. Even the humble compass, another Chinese innovation, found its way onto Arab ships, enabling navigators to weave together knowledge from Indian astronomy and Mediterranean cartography. The trade routes didn't just move goods, they assembled toolkits for cultural fusion. Nowhere is this more vivid than in the spice trade. When Roman gourmets developed a taste for black pepper from India, they weren't just seasoning their food, they were seasoning their worldview. Roman kitchens began incorporating garam, a fermented fish sauce from Southeast Asia, while Indian cooks adopted techniques for baking bread from Mediterranean recipes. These weren't superficial trends, they were dietary revolutions that reshored palates across continents. A single shipment of cloves could carry with it new cooking methods, medicinal beliefs, and even table manners. But the most profound exchanges happened in the realm of faith. Buddhism's journey from India to China along these routes wasn't a straight transplant, it was a metamorphosis. In Dunhuang's caves, murals show bodhisattvas wearing the flowing scarves of Persian royalty, their faces painted with the delicate brushstrokes of Chinese art. The Lotus Sutra, translated into Chinese by Sogdian merchants acting as linguistic middlemen, absorbed metaphors from Taoist philosophy, making concepts like karma feel familiar to new audiences. Even the iconic image of the laughing Buddha emerged from this interplay, blending Mahayana Buddhist ideals with the jovial earthiness of Chinese folk deities. What's astonishing is how these exchanges defied political boundaries. When the Tang dynasty needed to rebuild its capital after rebellion, it turned to Sogdian architects from Central Asia, who designed pagodas with crescent moon finials, a nod to Islamic influences. Meanwhile, in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars translated Greek medical texts into Arabic, only for those works to later reach medieval Europe via Moorish Spain, transformed by each culture they touched. The trade routes created a kind of cultural alchemy where ideas weren't just shared but remixed into something richer. This legacy lives on in ways we rarely notice. The guitar you strum, its ancestors traveled from Central Asia to Andalusia as the oud. The folktales you heard as a child, they might share DNA with stories told around campfires on the steppes of Mongolia. Even the concept of zero, the foundation of modern mathematics, migrated from Indian thinkers to Arab scholars before reaching Europe, each culture adding layers of meaning to what was once just an empty placeholder. These routes prove that culture isn't static. It's a conversation that never ends, with each generation adding its own verse. Yet perhaps the most enduring lesson from these ancient networks is their resilience. When the Black Death or political upheavals disrupted trade, the routes didn't vanish, they adapted. Persian merchants switched from land to sea, carrying not just goods but entire communities, planting pockets of their culture in port cities from Guangzhou to Zanzibar. This adaptability mirrors our own digital age, where ideas now travel along fiber optic cables instead of camel trails, but the fundamental truth remains: connection breeds transformation. The spices in your pantry, the melodies in your playlist, even the way you think about time and space, they're all testament to those first brave travelers who understood that the real treasure wasn't what you carried in your bags, but what you carried in your mind. Alexander the Great didn't just build an empire, he built a cultural laboratory. When he marched into Persia in 334 BCE, he didn't just defeat King Darius, he embraced his court's traditions, adopting the Persian title, King of Kings, and encouraging his Macedonian generals to marry Persian noblewomen. This wasn't merely political theater, it was a radical experiment in fusion governance where Greek philosophy met Persian statecraft, and the results were extraordinary. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became melting pots where Greek theaters stood beside Egyptian temples, and scholars debated astronomy using Babylonian star charts alongside Aristotle's logic. Alexander understood something revolutionary for his time. Conquest wasn't sustainable through force alone. Lasting power required weaving the vanquished into the fabric of the empire, transforming subjects into stakeholders. Rome took this lesson to heart. When Roman legions marched into Egypt, they didn't just loot the pyramids, they assimilated Isis into their pantheon, reimagining her as a universal mother goddess whose cult spread from London to Damascus. The Romans didn't stop there. They adopted Mithras from Persia, Cybele from Anatolia, and even the Celtic horse goddess Epona, repackaging them with Roman rituals but preserving their essence. This religious elasticity wasn't just spiritual generosity, it was imperial genius. By allowing conquered peoples to see their gods reflected in Rome's divine mosaic, the empire gave them a stake in its survival. A Syrian merchant could pray to Jupiter in the morning and his local storm god Baal in the evening, never feeling torn between identities. The brilliance of this strategy reveals itself in the artifacts left behind. In the ruins of Palmyra, a desert oasis city, statues show men wearing Roman togas with distinctly Syrian facial features, their inscriptions proudly declaring both their Latin citizenship and Aramaic heritage. In Britain, Roman baths were built over sacred Celtic springs, blending hygiene with native spirituality. Even the Roman military, that iron-fisted enforcer of imperial will, became a vehicle for syncretism. Auxiliary soldiers from Gaul or North Africa could earn citizenship by serving, bringing their customs into the ranks. The recipe for Rome's endurance wasn't just roads and aqueducts, it was this deliberate, calculated cultural blending, turning diversity into durability. But here's the twist: these hybrid identities often outlived the empires that created them. Long after Rome fell, Byzantine Christians still invoked Isis's epithets for the Virgin Mary. Persian-style bureaucracy, refined under Alexander's successors, became the backbone of Islamic caliphates. The Kushan Empire in Central Asia minted coins with Greek script on one side and Sanskrit on the other, a monetary metaphor for their dual heritage. These weren't passive inheritances, they were active choices, proof that people clung to hybridity long after the original political frameworks crumbled. What does this tell us about power and culture today? Modern nations often frame identity as a zero-sum game: assimilate or resist. But history whispers a different truth. The most enduring legacies emerge when cultures don't just collide but collaborate. The Persian-Greek fusion birthed advances in medicine and mathematics that fueled the Islamic Golden Age. Roman legal principles, blended with Germanic customs, became the foundation of European law. When we look at our own globalized world, where sushi is served in Mexico City and reggae plays in Tokyo, we're seeing the same ancient alchemy at work, proving that cultural boundaries have always been more permeable than politicians pretend. The real lesson from these empires isn't about conquest, it's about creative absorption. They thrived not by erasing differences but by making them ingredients in something new. In an age where walls and borders dominate headlines, perhaps we've forgotten what Alexander and Rome knew instinctively. The future belongs not to the purest culture, but to the most adaptable. Religious syncretism reveals something profound about human spirituality. It's never static, always evolving to meet the hearts of those who practice it. Take the goddess Isis, whose worship spread from the banks of the Nile to the foggy shores of Britain. Egyptian merchants and Roman soldiers carried her cult across the Mediterranean, but she didn't arrive unchanged. In Greece, she merged with Demeter, becoming a goddess of fertility and the harvest. In Rome, she absorbed attributes of Venus, her temples offering solace to sailors and slaves alike. By the time her devotees reached Britain, Isis had transformed again, her iconography blending with local water deities, her rituals adapted to Celtic seasons. This wasn't dilution, it was reinvention, proof that faith thrives when it speaks the language of the land it inhabits. Christianity's spread followed a similar pattern of creative absorption. When early missionaries set December 25th as the date for Christmas, they weren't erasing pagan traditions, they were meeting people where they were. Saturnalia, the Roman festival of light and renewal, already filled the darkest days of winter with feasting and gift-giving. By aligning Christ's birth with these celebrations, the Church didn't suppress the old ways, it sanctified them, weaving familiar joy into new theology. Even Easter's symbolism, eggs, rabbits, dawn services, echoes pre-Christian spring rites celebrating rebirth, a testament to how deeply spiritual traditions can intertwine. Hinduism offers perhaps the most layered example of religious syncretism. The vibrant faith we recognize today emerged from centuries of dialogue between Vedic hymns, Dravidian temple rituals, and tribal animism. Shiva, one of Hinduism's most revered gods, embodies this fusion. His meditative asceticism reflects Vedic ideals, while his wild, dancing form draws from tribal ecstatic traditions. Local goddesses were never replaced. They became manifestations of Divi, the divine feminine, their village shrines incorporated into grand temple complexes. This inclusive approach allowed Hinduism to absorb rather than erase, creating a spiritual mosaic where countless devotion could coexist. But syncretism isn't just ancient history. In modern Japan, Buddhist altars often sit alongside Shinto kami shelves in homes, reflecting a seamless blend of imported and indigenous beliefs. In the Caribbean, Santeria and Vodou weave Catholic saints with West African orishas, preserving ancestral memory under the guise of new iconography. These living traditions remind us that syncretism isn't about compromise, it's about resilience. When the Taino people of Hispaniola were forced to convert to Christianity, they secretly embedded their Zemi spirits into statues of the Virgin Mary, ensuring their gods survived colonization in plain sight. What makes these religious fusions so powerful is their emotional logic. A farmer praying to Isis Demeter for a bountiful harvest wasn't confused about her identity. He understood her as a divine force that transcended borders, capable of hearing him in the language of his ancestors. When a medieval European peasant left offerings for the Christianized spirits of wells and forests, they weren't betraying their faith, they were expanding it, finding holiness in the rhythms of their daily world. This flexibility speaks to a universal truth. The divine, however we conceive it, refuses to be confined by human categories. The irony is that many of today's pure religious traditions were once radical syntheses themselves. The Buddha's teachings absorbed Hindu concepts before spreading across Asia, adapting to Confucian values in China and Shinto aesthetics in Japan. Early Islamic scholars preserved Greek philosophy while blending it with Quranic wisdom, creating a golden age of intellectual exchange. Even the Protestant Reformation, often framed as a return to original Christianity, borrowed printing technology and vernacular preaching styles that were utterly new. History shows us that faith moves forward not by clinging to rigid orthodoxy, but by embracing the creative tension between preservation and innovation. Perhaps this is why syncretic traditions feel so alive. They acknowledge that spirituality, like culture, is a conversation across time. The next time you light a Christmas tree, celebrate Diwali's lamps, or admire a cathedral's green man carvings, you're participating in that ancient dialogue. These rituals carry the whispers of countless generations who refuse to choose between the old and the new, finding divinity instead in the spaces where they meet. Languages are time capsules of cultural collision, carrying within their grammar and vocabulary the echoes of ancient encounters that reshaped civilizations. Consider Latin. The tongue of Rome didn't fade into obscurity when the empire fell. Instead, it melted into the dialects of conquered peoples, emerging centuries later as the lyrical cadence of Spanish, the precision of French, the musicality of Italian. But this wasn't a one-way transformation. In Spain, Arabic words like azúcar, sugar, and alcohol wove into the Romance tapestry during 7 centuries of Moorish rule, while in Sicily, Greek, Arabic, and Norman French fused to create a linguistic mosaic as vibrant as the island's spice markets. Sanskrit's journey reveals even more dramatic reinvention. When Alexander's armies marched into the Indus Valley, they didn't just bring spears and shields, they brought Greek verbs that curled around Sanskrit roots like vines, birthing hybrid languages like Gandhara. Centuries later, Persian rulers infused Sanskrit with administrative terms, while Buddhist missionaries carried it eastward, where it merged with Tibetan and Chinese to create entirely new scripts. The Devanagari script we associate with Hindi today, its elegant curves were shaped by traders adapting Arabic calligraphy to fit the rhythms of local speech. No language embodies syncretism more vividly than English. When Norman conquerors imposed French on Anglo-Saxon peasants, they didn't erase the old tongue, they forced it to evolve. Anglo-Saxon words like house and child survived, but now shared the lexicon with French borrowings like mansion and infant. Latin, reintroduced by scholars, lent abstract terms like justice and science, while Viking raiders left behind blunt, powerful words like sky and knife. The result was a linguistic Frankenstein, a language flexible enough to absorb Malay words like ketchup during colonial expansion, Hindi terms like shampoo from trade routes, and Yiddish expressions like schmooze from immigrant communities. This blending wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Multilingual empires understood that shared vocabulary could unify far-flung territories. The Swahili language became the glue of East African trade, stitching together Bantu grammar with Arabic loanwords, allowing merchants from Zanzibar to the Congo to negotiate in a common tongue. In the Ottoman Empire, a single sentence might layer Turkish, Persian, and Arabic, mirroring the layered identities of its subjects. Even today, when we type algorithm from the Arabic scholar al-Khwarizmi or tycoon from the Japanese taikun, we're tapping into ancient networks of cultural exchange. But linguistic syncretism goes deeper than vocabulary. Grammar itself bends to accommodate new speakers. Haitian Creole simplified French verb conjugations while keeping West African sentence structures, creating a language as resilient as the people who forged it. In India, English shed its rigid articles and picked up the rhythmic cadence of Hindi, giving rise to a distinct dialect that's now a marker of national identity. These adaptations aren't corruptions, they're proof that language, like culture, refuses to stay static. The most fascinating aspect of this process, it's never truly finished. Text messages today blend emoji, a Japanese word, with abbreviations from early internet forums, while Spanglish and Hinglish evolve as living testaments to border-crossing communities. When a teenager in Lagos says "sef," a Nigerian English hybrid meaning even, or a surfer in California says "gnarly," a term born from skateboard slang and Valley Girl dialect, they're participating in the same ancient alchemy that turned Latin into Catalan or Sanskrit into Bengali. Languages don't just borrow, they metabolize, transforming foreign elements into something unmistakably their own. Perhaps this explains why linguistic purists so often fail. From the Académie Française's war on le weekend to Hindi nationalists rejecting train in favor of rail gadi, attempts to freeze language in time ignore its fundamental nature. It's a living, breathing record of human connection. The next time you order sushi, a word that traveled from Chinese to Japanese to global menus, or complain about paperwork, a concept inherited from Persian bureaucracy via French, remember, you're not just speaking. You're channeling millennia of cultural conversation, one syllable at a time. The Gandhara Buddha sits in quiet revolution, his face bearing the balanced proportions of a Greek Apollo, yet his elongated ears and serene smile unmistakably South Asian. Carved 2,000 years ago in what's now Pakistan, these sculptures didn't just blend aesthetics, they rewrote the visual language of spirituality. Hellenistic artists trained in realism met Buddhist monks who valued inner peace over physical form, and together they birthed something unprecedented, divine figures with human grace. The drapery of the Buddha's robes cascades like a Roman toga, but the lotus beneath his feet roots him firmly in Indian soil. This wasn't cultural appropriation, it was alchemy, where two traditions collided to create an iconography so powerful it still defines Buddhist art today. Step into the Roman Forum and you'll witness another layer of this visual dialogue. Those towering obelisks flanking the ruins plundered from Egypt but transformed. The Romans didn't just haul them home as trophies, they recarved their hieroglyphs with Latin dedications, turning symbols of pharaonic power into monuments to imperial triumph. Even the Pantheon's dome, that marvel of engineering, owes its brilliance to borrowed knowledge. Its concrete recipe likely came from Alexandrian architects, while the oculus design echoes Persian fire temples. Rome's genius wasn't in invention alone, but in reinvention, stitching together Mediterranean influences into an architectural language that proclaimed, "This belongs to us all." Nowhere is this fusion more breathtaking than in Spain's Alhambra. Here, Nasrid craftsmen chiseled Quranic verses into walls alongside Christian heraldry after the Reconquista, their arabesques swirling like frozen calligraphy. The palace's famous lion fountain, its 12 marble beasts may reference the zodiac from Jewish astrology, while the courtyard's layout mirrors Persian paradise gardens. Moorish architects didn't just tolerate other traditions, they actively curated them, creating spaces where Islamic geometry, Christian symbolism, and Sephardic ornament whispered to one another across confessional lines. Fast forward to modern cities and the dialogue continues. The dome of the U.S. Capitol nods to Rome, but its neoclassical columns stand beside Native American motifs in the rotunda's frescoes. Tokyo's skyscrapers fuse Shinto reverence for wood with German Bauhaus minimalism. Even the humble Brazil wood chair in a Rio de Janeiro cafe tells a story, its curvaceous Art Nouveau lines filtered through Portuguese colonial workshops, then reinterpreted by Afro-Brazilian carvers. These aren't accidents of globalism, they're conscious choices, proof that artists still find potency in the space between traditions. What makes these cross-cultural creations endure isn't just their beauty, but their bravery. When Mughal Emperor Akbar commissioned the Fatehpur Sikri complex, he didn't pit Hindu masons against Muslim calligraphers, he had them collaborate, resulting in pillars carved with peacocks, taboo in Islam, alongside Quranic inscriptions in Sanskrit-inspired script. The Mexican muralist Diego Rivera later channeled this same boldness, painting Aztec gods alongside Marxist imagery on European-style frescoes. True syncretic art doesn't dilute, it amplifies, creating visual metaphors that speak in multiple dialects simultaneously. Perhaps that's why these hybrids resonate so deeply today. The Afrofuturism of Black Panther's Wakanda draws equal power from Zulu shields and Korean digital effects. The graffiti in Berlin's Kreuzberg district mixes Arabic calligraphy with punk stencils, while Maori tattoo motifs inspire Baltic jewelry designers. Just as Gandhara sculptors realized centuries ago, the most compelling art often emerges not from purity, but from the electric friction of difference, when a Greek chisel meets an Indian spiritual vision, or when a VR headset displays patterns first dreamed up by Andean weavers. The canvas of human creativity has always been boundless, and its masterpieces, they're signed by countless cultures, each leaving strokes no single tradition could achieve alone. Greco-Buddhism didn't just happen, it erupted at the crossroads of two seismic cultural shifts. Picture the moment when a Greek sculptor in ancient Bactria, trained to carve the perfect musculature of Heracles, first heard a Buddhist monk describe enlightenment. The idea of depicting the formless Buddha in human shape must have seemed impossible until it didn't. Drawing on Apollo's idealized features and the contemplative calm of Indian ascetics, these artists birthed an iconography that would ripple across Asia for centuries. The Gandhara Buddha's wavy hair, borrowed from Hellenistic gods, framed a face radiating the inward peace of nirvana, while his draped robe, so reminiscent of a Roman senator's toga, flowed with the grace of a yogi's garment. This was no haphazard collage. It was a visual philosophy proving that spiritual ideals could transcend their origins. What made this fusion so revolutionary was its audacity. Before Gandhara, Buddhist art relied on symbols, footprints, empty thrones, the Bodhi tree to represent the Buddha's presence. The Greeks, with their obsession for the human form, shattered that tradition. Suddenly, enlightenment had a face, one that blended the mathematical precision of Greek proportions with the subtle serenity of Indian spirituality. The result, a Buddha whose half-closed eyes seemed to gaze beyond the material world, yet whose perfectly balanced features made divinity feel achingly human. These sculptures weren't just art, They were bridges allowing worshippers from Greece to China to see themselves in the sacred. The legacy of this synthesis stretches far beyond museum displays. When the Kushan Empire adopted Greco-Buddhist art, it created a visual lingua franca that carried Mahayana Buddhism into Central Asia. The caves of Dunhuang reveal how this style evolved, Buddha's Greek-inspired curls gradually merging with Chinese brushstroke techniques, his robes acquiring the flowing lines of silk paintings. Even Japan's earliest Buddhist statues, centuries later, bear the faint echo of those initial Hellenistic influences, proving how far a creative spark can travel. But perhaps the most profound impact was philosophical. Greek logic met Buddhist metaphysics in the bustling markets of Taxila, where philosophers debated using Aristotelian syllogisms to explain karma. The Milinda Panha, a Buddhist text, records a dialogue between King Menander, a Greek ruler of Bactria, and the sage Nagisna, weaving Socratic questioning with Dharma teachings. This wasn't just cultural exchange, it was intellectual alchemy, forging new ways to ponder existence itself. Today, we see Greco-Buddhism's fingerprints in unexpected places, from the halo in Christian iconography, originally a Greek solar disk adapted by Buddhist artists, to the serene expressions of Southeast Asia's Buddha statues. Its greatest lesson isn't about art history, but about possibility, that when civilizations collide with openness, they don't just share, they transform. The next time you see a yoga studio's Greek columned facade or a mindfulness app using Stoic quotes, you're witnessing that ancient dialogue still unfolding, still reminding us that wisdom, like beauty, thrives when it refuses to stay within borders. Deep beneath the streets of Rome, in candlelit caves known as Mithraia, soldiers and merchants once gathered for rituals that would seem strangely familiar to modern eyes. They knelt before altars depicting a god slaying a bull, an image borrowed from Persian Zoroastrianism, yet reinterpreted with Roman pragmatism. This was Mithras, not quite the Persian Mithra who championed truth and contracts, but a new deity tailored for an empire's spiritual hunger. His cult didn't spread through conquest or decree, but through the most powerful network of the ancient world, the Roman military. Legionnaires stationed on the frigid borders of Scotland or the scorching sands of Syria carried Mithras with them, adapting his rituals to local customs while preserving a core of Persian mysticism. What made Mithraism so compelling was its genius for synthesis. The Persian original, a god of light and cosmic order, merged seamlessly with Roman values. Initiation rites mirrored military promotions, with 7 grades of membership echoing the army's hierarchy. The ritual meal of bread and wine, shared in underground sanctuaries designed to resemble caves, evoked both Persian sacred banquets and the camaraderie of Roman mess halls. Even the bull-slaying scene, the tauroctony, was a masterstroke of syncretism. To Persians, it recalled the primal sacrifice of creation. To Romans, it symbolized discipline overcoming chaos. This wasn't mere borrowing, it was spiritual alchemy, transforming Mithra into a god who spoke equally to a Syrian trader and a Gallic auxiliary. Yet Mithraism's greatest legacy might be what it left behind. Early Christians competing for converts in Rome's spiritual marketplace adopted more than a few of its tactics. The date of Christmas, December 25th, coincided with Mithra's birth festival, Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. The halo encircling Christian saints' heads, a direct lift from Mithraic depictions of the sun god's radiance. Even the concept of a sacred meal took on new resonance in Christian Eucharist, though the theology behind it diverged sharply. These parallels weren't coincidental. They were strategic, evidence of how faiths evolve in dialogue with rivals. The cult's eventual disappearance reveals syncretism's double edge. Mithraism thrived by adapting, but in doing so, it became inseparable from the very empire that nurtured it. When Rome Christianized, Mithras had no homeland to return to, no Persian revival to reinvigorate his worship. Unlike Isis, who could shed her Roman trappings and remain essentially Egyptian, Mithras had transformed too thoroughly. His fate hints at a profound truth. Syncretism can be both a superpower and a vulnerability, empowering cultures to spread but sometimes erasing the traits that made them distinct. Modern echoes of this ancient rivalry linger in unexpected places. The word mystery itself comes from the Greek mysterion, a term used for Mithraic initiation rites. Corporate team building exercises with their staged challenges and symbolic rewards unconsciously mirror Mithraism's graded membership system. Even the enduring image of the sun as a symbol of divine power, from Renaissance paintings to national flags, owes a debt to those underground temples where Romans once paid homage to a Persian god reimagined. Mithraism's story reminds us that the most influential ideas aren't always the ones that survive intact, but those that dissolve into the cultural bloodstream, shaping the future in ways their originators could never foresee. Rome's fascination with Egypt began long before Cleopatra's legendary affair with Caesar. It was an obsession that reshaped the empire's spiritual landscape. When Augustus brought the first obelisk from Heliopolis to Rome in 10 BCE, he wasn't just importing a trophy, he was transplanting an entire cosmic symbol. These towering monoliths, originally aligned with Egyptian solar worship, became Romanized overnight, their hieroglyphs translated into Latin dedications to imperial power, their gilded pinnacles catching the Mediterranean sun as if nothing had changed. But everything had. These weren't mere decorations, they were declarations that Rome's gods now shared the sky with Egypt's. At the heart of this cultural exchange stood Isis, whose cult spread through Roman ports like wildfire. Unlike traditional Roman deities tied to specific cities or functions, Isis offered something revolutionary: universal salvation. Her temples in Pompeii boasted frescoes showing Nile floods alongside Roman senators in prayer, while initiates in London drank sacred water from the Tiber mixed with Nile silt. This wasn't just exoticism, it was spiritual globalization. The Roman version of Isis absorbed attributes from half a dozen Mediterranean goddesses: Demeter's nurturing, Aphrodite's allure, even Juno's regality, creating a deity flexible enough to comfort German slaves and patrician women alike. The real masterpiece of religious engineering was Serapis, a god literally invented for cross-cultural appeal. Ptolemy I had dreamed up this hybrid of Osiris and the Apis bull centuries earlier, giving him Zeus-like features for Greek worshippers while preserving Egyptian underworld symbolism. But Rome took the experiment further. Serapis' temples blended Egyptian hypostyle halls with Roman basilica layouts, his statues marrying pharaonic serenity with Roman verism. Emperors from Vespasian to Caracalla consulted his oracles, not as foreign curiosities but as imperial institutions. Here was a deity designed for empire, one whose very existence proved that divine power could be customized. Yet the influence flowed both ways. Walk through Alexandria's cemeteries and you'll find mummy portraits painted in vivid Roman realism, faces with wrinkles, asymmetrical smiles, even rosy cheeks, a stark departure from Egypt's stylized afterlife art. These weren't concessions to occupiers, they were conscious choices by Egyptian elites who wanted their eternal likenesses to reflect the cosmopolitan world they inhabited. Even hieroglyphs evolved, with Roman-era carvings incorporating shading techniques borrowed from Mediterranean sculpture, making sacred texts suddenly pop with three-dimensional life. This cultural tango reveals a truth that unsettles traditional narratives of conquest. The conquered often shape the conquerors. Rome's legions may have marched under eagle standards, but their homes were soon filled with Egyptian blue faience, their bathhouses scented with Nile lotus oil. When Hadrian built his villa at Tivoli, its Canopus Canal wasn't just an architectural homage, it was a pilgrimage route to an Egypt of the mind, where Roman power and Egyptian mystery could coexist. The obelisks still standing in Rome's piazzas today aren't just relics of plunder, they're monuments to history's most enduring lesson, that no culture, no matter how mighty, remains unchanged by those it encounters. When Spanish ships first crashed onto American shores, they carried more than crossbows and crucifixes. They carried the seeds of an unintended cultural revolution. The conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires wasn't just a military campaign. It became one of history's most dramatic laboratories of religious fusion. Take the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City, built atop the ruins of Tonantzin Temple. To Spanish friars, this was a triumph of Christianity over pagan idolatry. To Nahua converts, the dark-skinned virgin who appeared to Juan Diego in 1531 wasn't just a Catholic saint, she was Tonantzin reborn, the Earth Mother who had never truly left. Her cloak, emblazoned with stars mirroring the Mexican night sky, fused the Aztec celestial calendar with Christian iconography in a single visionary tapestry. The Andes witnessed an even more astonishing metamorphosis. When Inca nobles were forced to convert, they didn't abandon Inti, their sun god, they baptized him. The Corpus Christi procession in Cusco still features saints carrying golden sun discs, while Quechua hymns describe Christ as Punchao, the radiant dawn. Spanish chroniclers wrote of indigenous artists painting angels with corn-colored hair and wings shaped like condor feathers, while churches incorporated trapezoidal doorways, a sacred Inca architectural form believed to withstand earthquakes. These weren't acts of subterfuge, but of translation, finding the divine in the spaces where two worlds overlapped. Nowhere is this creative resistance more vivid than in the Amazon. Jesuit missionaries arriving in the rainforest found tribes who had already mapped Catholic saints onto their cosmology. Saint Francis became the protector of animals, his iconography blending with shamanic spirit guides. The cross, planted in village squares, was reinterpreted as the world tree linking Earth to the heavens, a concept central to indigenous cosmologies from the Maya to the Mapuche. Even the Eucharist took on new meaning. Some Yanomami communities saw communion wafers as peyote, the sacred cactus that opened doors to the spirit world. What makes American syncretism unique is its sheer pragmatism. Unlike the Greco-Buddhist fusion of Gandhara or Rome's calculated adoption of Egyptian gods, these blends emerged from communities fighting for cultural survival. The chrismons, woven into Mayan textiles, cross motifs hiding ancient glyphs, were more than decorative. They were clandestine alphabets, preserving knowledge under the noses of colonial priests. The Day of the Dead, with its Catholic veneer of All Saints' Day, kept alive Mesoamerican beliefs about the permeable boundary between worlds. Even chocolate, once used in Aztec rituals, was reborn as a Christian fasting drink before conquering European palates. The genius of these fusions lies in their layered meanings. A Quechua farmer praying before a statue of Santiago might see both the Spanish saint on horseback and Elapa, the Inca lightning god whose galloping across the sky brought rain. The same church mural could show biblical scenes to a friar and tell agricultural myths to a campesino. This duality wasn't confusion, it was sophistication, a way to honor ancestral wisdom while navigating colonial rule. Modern echoes of this synthesis are everywhere. The Virgin of Guadalupe's image now graces everything from migrant rights posters to lowrider cars, a symbol of Mexican identity transcending its hybrid origins. Andean miners still offer llama fetuses to Pachamama before descending into earth they equate with the Christian hell. These living traditions prove that syncretism isn't about erasure, it's about evolution, the stubborn refusal of culture to be contained by the categories empires impose. When we see a Huicol yarn painting depicting the Virgin Mary with deer spirit eyes, we're witnessing more than art. We're seeing the future being woven from threads of the past, one resilient stitch at a time. The Silk Road's true magic wasn't in the bolts of fabric or sacks of spices that changed hands. It was in the invisible cargo those caravans carried. When a Chinese papermaker's technique reached Samarkand in the 8th century, it didn't just create a new industry, it rewrote the rules of intellectual exchange. Suddenly, Persian poets could scribble verses on sheets lighter than papyrus, Buddhist monks could copy sutras by the thousands, and Arab mathematicians could spread algorithms across continents with unprecedented speed. This humble innovation became the social media of its day, accelerating the cross-pollination of ideas faster than ever before. Food tells an equally delicious story of fusion. The dumplings steaming in a Aigha market today stuffed with lamb and cumin, their pleated edges mirroring Chinese jiaozi are edible artifacts of this culinary dialogue. Persian saffron found its way into Tang dynasty pastries, while Central Asian flatbreads evolved into the naan served in Delhi's Mughal courts. Even something as simple as a bowl of noodles reveals layers of adaptation. What began as hand-pulled wheat strands in China transformed into pasta after encountering durum wheat in the Middle East, eventually sailing to Italy with Arab traders. These weren't just recipe swaps, they were acts of creative reinvention, proving that taste buds could bridge divides no treaty ever could. Religious ideas flowed just as freely along these routes. A Nestorian Christian stele from 7th century Xi'an bears inscriptions in Syriac and Chinese, its cross nestled among lotus flowers, a visual metaphor for how faiths intertwined. Buddhist monasteries in Dunhuang commissioned Zoroastrian artists to paint their murals, resulting in celestial beings with Persian facial features floating above Chinese landscapes. Turkic shamans chanting epic poetry might invoke both the sky god Tengri and the Quranic Allah without seeing contradiction, blending spiritual vocabularies as effortlessly as merchants mixed languages in bazaars. The Silk Road's greatest legacy, it proved that cultural exchange isn't a zero-sum game. When Persian carpets adorned Tang palaces, their intricate geometric patterns didn't replace Chinese floral motifs, they inspired new designs where peonies bloomed within arabesque frames. The lute-like pipa traveled from Central Asia to become a staple of Chinese orchestras, while Central Asian musicians adapted Chinese tuning systems to create entirely new scales. Even medicine transformed as Greek humoral theory met Ayurvedic practices in Baghdad's hospitals, giving rise to treatment protocols that would later influence European medieval medicine. What made this possible was the Silk Road's unspoken rule. Difference wasn't a barrier, but an invitation to innovate. Sogdian merchants, the master connectors of their era, didn't just translate goods between languages. They translated meanings, explaining Buddhist parables to Zoroastrians or demonstrating Chinese tea ceremonies to Byzantine diplomats. The caravanserais where travelers rested weren't just inns. They were idea labs where a Persian astronomer might sketch constellations for a Tibetan monk using Greek mathematical notation. This constant remixing created a cultural ecosystem far richer than the sum of its parts, one where a Turkic ruler could commission a Sanskrit play, or a Chinese general might quote Persian poetry in his memoirs. Today's globalized world often feels unprecedented, but the Silk Road reminds us we've been here before. The hashtags trending on Twitter and the memes bouncing across TikTok are the spiritual descendants of those medieval trade routes, proving once again that when human curiosity meets open pathways, the results are endlessly surprising. The next time you twirl forkfuls of spaghetti or admire a mosque's blue-tiled dome, remember, you're tasting and touching the living legacy of history's most vibrant conversation. Africa's story of cultural fusion shatters every stereotype about isolation. Far from being cut off from the world, kingdoms like Aksum in modern-day Ethiopia operated as vibrant hubs where African traditions danced with Roman coins, Indian spices, and Arab calligraphy. Walk through the ruins of Aksum's obelisks, and you'll find inscriptions in Sabaean, Greek, and Ge'ez, the local script that later birthed Ethiopia's literary tradition. This wasn't mimicry, it was mastery. Aksumite rulers minted gold coins with their profiles styled like Roman emperors, yet stamped with the crescent and disk of indigenous moon gods. Their stelae soared higher than Egyptian obelisks, but their geometric precision bore the unmistakable fingerprint of Nubian architects. Here was a civilization confident enough to borrow, bold enough to reinvent. Now sail down the Swahili coast, where stone towns like Kilwa and Zanzibar hummed with a linguistic alchemy still heard today. Swahili didn't just borrow Arabic words, it remade them. The Arabic kitab book became Swahili's kitabu, rolling off Bantu grammatical structures like waves on coral shores. Indian dhow builders taught coastal craftsmen to stitch coconut fiber hulls, creating hybrid vessels that carried African gold to Cambay and Chinese porcelain to Mogadishu. The Great Mosque of Kilwa, with its coral arches and Quranic inscriptions, wasn't an imported template but a declaration. Islam here would wear an African face. Nothing captures this creative confidence more strikingly than the Benin bronzes. When Portuguese sailors arrived in the 15th century, Benin's artists didn't simply copy European features, they interpreted them through an entirely African visual language. Those iconic brass plaques show bearded traders with elongated necks and stylized armor, their muskets rendered like ceremonial staffs. The Oba's court sculptors used the lost wax technique they'd perfected over centuries, turning foreign visitors into mythic figures within Benin's own cosmology. This was art as diplomacy, a way to document encounter without surrendering aesthetic sovereignty. The Sahara, often imagined as a barrier, was in fact history's greatest cultural conveyor belt. Tuareg camel caravans carried not just salt and gold but ideas, weaving a transcontinental tapestry. In Timbuktu's libraries, Greek logic texts translated into Arabic rubbed spines with West African chronicles written in Ajami Arabic script adapted to record Songhay and Fulfulde. Mali's Mansa Musa didn't just distribute gold on his Hajj. He brought back Andalusian architects who blended Moorish geometry with Sudano-Sahelian mud brick engineering, creating mosques that seemed to grow from the earth itself. These fusions weren't accidents, they were acts of deliberate curation. The Luba people of the Congo integrated Portuguese crucifixes into their royal staffs, not as symbols of conversion, but as emblems of spiritual power that now spanned oceans. In Madagascar, Austronesian outrigger canoes merged with African hull designs to create vessels capable of riding the monsoon winds to India. Even resistance movements weaponized syncretism. The Haitian revolutionaries who overturned slavery invoked both the African LWA and Catholic saints, turning the colonizers' religion into a rallying cry for liberation. What makes Africa's syncretic genius extraordinary is its refusal to be reduced to a single narrative. The same continent that gave us the Afro-Arabic Swahili poetry of Liyongo also produced the Yoruba Ifa divination system, where verses memorized over centuries encode mathematical precision rivaling the Fibonacci sequence. From the Nubian kings who ruled Egypt as pharaohs to the Afro-Portuguese ivories carved in Sierra Leone, these stories demolish the tired trope of a passive Africa waiting for external influence. Instead, they reveal a continent that has always set the terms of engagement, absorbing what served its vision and transforming the rest into something unmistakably its own. The heartbeat of cultural syncretism pulses strongest where bodies move to ancient rhythms made new. Take flamenco, that fiery Spanish art form we often picture in Andalusian taverns. Its soul isn't purely Iberian. Listen closely to the rasguido guitar strumming, and you'll hear the ghostly echo of Persian lute techniques brought by Moorish musicians. The footwork's percussive fury, that's the legacy of Romani dancers who carried Indian Kathak rhythms across continents. Even the raw, emotional Count Jondo singing style intertwines Sephardic Jewish laments with Arabic melodic scales. This wasn't cultural appropriation, it was alchemy, transforming exile into art that makes spines tingle centuries later. Cross the Atlantic, and the story grows even richer. Salsa music, that quintessential Latin sound, owes its DNA to West African drum circles and Spanish poetic forms. The clave rhythm at its core traveled from Cuba's sugar plantations, where enslaved Yoruba people preserved sacred bata drum patterns by disguising them as dance music. Mix in Puerto Rican plena, Dominican merengue, and New York jazz brass sections, and you've got a sound that defies borders. Every hip swivel in a salsa club carries the memory of Afro-Cuban orishas dancing alongside Spanish troubadours, their movements preserved in the collective muscle memory of generations. Classical composers weren't immune to this magnetic pull of cultural fusion. Mozart's Rondo alla Turca didn't just borrow Ottoman motifs as exotic decoration. It channeled the Janissary band craze sweeping 18th century Vienna. Those crashing cymbals and piccolo runs were direct homages to the meta military bands that terrified European armies, repurposed into piano sonatas for aristocratic salons. Centuries later, you can trace this lineage in Dvorak's New World Symphony, where Cherokee melodies weave through Bohemian orchestration, or in Ravel's Bolero, which transforms a Spanish dance into a hypnotic architectural masterpiece. What makes musical syncretism so powerful is its immediacy. You don't need a history book to feel it, your body knows. When the kora harp of Mali's griots merges with blues guitar riffs, creating the desert blues of Tinariwen, listeners from Tokyo to Texas instinctively nod to the groove. The Brazilian berimbau, an African musical bow that once accompanied capoeira's martial arts disguises, now lends its metallic twang to psychedelic rock bands. These instruments carry stories no textbook could convey, speaking a universal language of vibration and resonance. Today's pop charts prove this phenomenon never stopped. K-pop idols sample traditional pansori singing over trap beats, while Colombian reggaetoneros layer indigenous gaita flute loops beneath dembow rhythms from Jamaica. The weakened synth pop drips with Ethiopian jazz inflections, just as MIA's punk rap anthems pulse with Sri Lankan Bela beats. Each is a living testament to music's endless recombinant genius, proof that when cultures collide in rhythm, they don't erase each other, they amplify. Perhaps that's why dance floors remain humanity's most democratic spaces. When a tango forms in Buenos Aires, that sensual fusion of African candombe, European waltz, and indigenous milonga partners don't negotiate origins before embracing. In New Orleans' Congo Square, where enslaved people once preserved West African ring shouts, their descendants now twirl to Mardi Gras Indian chants mixed with funk bass lines. The body remembers what politics forgets. That movement, like music, is a borderless tongue, forever inventing new dialects from old wounds and older joys. Pizza wasn't always the global icon we know today. Its story begins in 18th century Naples, where poor laborers topped flatbreads with whatever they could afford: tomatoes, a New World fruit once feared as poisonous, garlic from Mediterranean trade routes, and cheese made from milk brought by Arab settlers to Sicily centuries earlier. This humble dish didn't just feed families, it became an edible archive of cultural exchange. When Italian immigrants brought pizza to America, it collided with industrial abundance. The result, a Detroit assembly line worker piled toppings edge to edge, creating the deep dish style, while New York's coal ovens gave us the thin, foldable slice. Today, a bite of sushi pizza in Toronto or kimchi topped pizza in Seoul proves this Neapolitan invention never stopped evolving. Each iteration a delicious testament to how cultures reshape what they adopt. Chili peppers tell an even more dramatic tale. Portuguese traders, craving the heat of Indian black pepper, stumbled upon American chilies in the 15th century and saw opportunity. They ferried these fiery pods to Goa, where they ignited a culinary revolution. Thai cooks who'd relied on ginger and peppercorns for spice wove chilies into their curries, creating the vibrant heat we associate with tom yum soup today. Sichuan chefs in China, already masters of mouth-numbing peppercorns, doubled down with chilies, crafting the incendiary mapo tofu. None of these dishes could have existed before the Columbian Exchange, that seismic swap of crops between hemispheres after 1492. Imagine Italian food without tomatoes, Hungarian goulash without paprika, or Malaysian sambal without chili paste. The very flavors we consider traditional are often the result of culinary collisions that rewrote entire food cultures. The Columbian Exchange wasn't just about ingredients, it reshaped farming, economies, and even bodies. European potatoes, transplanted to Andean soil, became Ireland's staple crop, only to fail catastrophically in the 1840s, triggering mass migration to America. Meanwhile, African yams and Asian rice took root in the American South, sustaining enslaved communities and birthing Creole cuisine. The turkey, domesticated by Mesoamericans, became the centerpiece of English Christmas feasts, while American maize fed Venetian polenta makers and West African fufu pounders alike. These weren't passive adoptions, they were acts of culinary ingenuity. West African cooks transformed New World peanuts into rich stews, while Italian peasants turned American tomatoes into slow-simmered ragu. Every adaptation carried the fingerprints of the people who made it their own. Modern fusion cuisine often gets dismissed as trendy, but history shows it's humanity's oldest recipe. The curry, served in Tokyo cafes, traces back to British naval officers who craved Indian food but lacked the spices, leading to roux-thickened kare resu. The croissant, that symbol of French patisserie, it evolved from Austrian kipfel, introduced by bakers fleeing Ottoman sieges in the 17th century. Even the humble donut traveled from Dutch oliebollen to American diners, where immigrants like the Levain bakery founders added Jewish pastry techniques to create the cronut, a hybrid so popular it sparked overnight lines in Manhattan. What makes food such a powerful vehicle for syncretism is its immediacy. You don't need to speak a language to share a meal, and flavors can convey what words cannot. The next time you bite into a taco al pastor, marinated pork on a spit borrowed from Lebanese shawarma, served on a corn tortilla with indigenous roots, you're tasting centuries of dialogue between cultures. Or consider the banh mi, where French baguettes meet Vietnamese pâté and cilantro, a culinary handshake forged in colonial kitchens but perfected by street vendors. These dishes don't just cross borders, they dissolve them, proving that innovation thrives where traditions touch. The true magic lies in how these fusions become invisible over time. We forget that the classic flavors we cherish were once radical experiments. Chocolate, once a bitter Aztec ritual drink, became Swiss milk chocolate thanks to European sugar and dairy. The all-American hamburger, its ancestor was a Mongol horseman's minced meat patty carried west by Turkic tribes to Germany, then sailed to New York by immigrants. Food's greatest trick is making the extraordinary feel inevitable, turning the collisions of history into comforts we can hold in our hands, one unforgettable bite at a time. Colonial encounters often forced cultures together under the lash of oppression, creating fusions born not of curiosity but survival. Enslaved Africans in the Caribbean, stripped of everything but their memories, performed a breathtaking act of spiritual alchemy. They recognized the Orishas, the Yoruba deities of their homeland. In the Catholic saints their enslavers demanded they worship. Ogun, the warrior god of iron and labor, found his counterpart in Saint James the Moor Slayer, both depicted astride fierce horses. Yamaya, Mother of the Seas, merged with the Virgin Mary as Our Lady of Regla, her blue robes mirroring ocean waves. This wasn't surrender, it was subversion. Behind the facade of forced conversion, Vodou and Santeria preserved entire cosmologies, disguising ancestral wisdom in plain sight through sacred drum patterns, herbal knowledge, and coded songs that still pulse through Havana's streets and New Orleans' back alleys today. The same brutal creativity flourished in North America's indigenous communities, where boarding schools sought to kill the Indian, save the man. Children forbidden to speak their languages or wear traditional clothing secretly wove native words into hymns, transforming compulsory Bible lessons into covert language classes. Quilled floral patterns from Ojibwe traditions resurfaced in the embroidery of European-style dresses, while Lakota star knowledge hid within the geometry of Christian quilts. Even the ghost dance movement of the late 19th century blended Paiute prophecy with Christian resurrection imagery, creating a resistance theology that terrified colonial authorities precisely because it proved indigenous spirituality could adapt without disappearing. These forced fusions reveal syncretism's paradoxical power. It can be both a wound and a weapon. When Portuguese colonizers imposed Christianity in Congo, local artists carved crucifixes with Christ's face resembling the Nkisi spirits of their own faith, turning symbols of domination into vessels of continuity. In the Philippines, Hispanicized folk dances like the tinikling retained pre-colonial bamboo rhythms, their steps mocking Spanish landowners by mimicking escaped slaves dodging punishment. The very tools meant to erase culture became canvases for its reinvention. What makes these stories so wrenching and so vital is their refusal to fit neat narratives of victimhood. The Jamaican Maroons, who blended Akan military tactics with Taino guerrilla warfare, didn't just survive slavery, they built sovereign communities in the Blue Mountains. The Navajo code talkers of World War II turned their suppressed language into an unbreakable cipher, weaponizing the very identity oppressors had tried to stamp out. These aren't tales of passive absorption but of active reclamation, proving that even the most violent cultural collisions can't extinguish the human drive to make meaning on one's own terms. Yet this history carries sobering lessons. The pidgin languages born on slave plantations, while testaments to resilience, also remind us how much was irrevocably lost. Entire grammatical structures, oral epics, and ways of seeing the world fractured beyond recovery. The fact that Vodou is still sensationalized as black magic in Hollywood reflects how colonial frames persist in distorting syncretic traditions. Even well-meaning celebrations of hybridity risk glossing over the brutality that necessitated such creativity in the first place. Perhaps the deepest truth lies in the quiet acts of remembrance that continue today. In Bahia, Brazil, candomblé practitioners offer coconut water to oxum at Catholic shrines, their bare feet pressing into the same soil where their ancestors were whipped for such devotions. In South Dakota, Lakota families baptize children with sacred sage smoke alongside holy water, honoring both traditions without contradiction. These living practices whisper that cultural survival isn't about purity, it's about persistence, the stubborn insistence that identity can be both fluid and unbroken, even when the world tries to dictate the terms. Modern religious syncretism pulses through daily life in ways we often overlook. Walk through Rio de Janeiro during Festa de Iemanjá, and you'll see devotees tossing white flowers into the waves, some calling her the Virgin Mary, others the Yoruba Orisha of the sea. This is Umbanda in action, a Brazilian faith where Catholic saints dance alongside African spirits, and Kardecist spiritist doctrines about reincarnation blend seamlessly with indigenous ancestor veneration. When mediums in white garments channel both Padre Pio and Pretos Velho's wise spirits of enslaved ancestors, they're not mixing contradictions. They're weaving a spiritual safety net wide enough to catch every sorrow and hope in a nation forged from collision. Japan's embrace of Christmas reveals syncretism's secular side. In a country where less than 1% of the population identifies as Christian, December 25th transforms into a kaleidoscope of illuminated trees, KFC feasts, and romantic dates, a holiday stripped of theology but saturated with cultural borrowings. The same happens with Shinto weddings followed by Christian-style white dresses, or Buddhist funerals incorporating Valentine's Day chocolates left for the deceased. These aren't shallow commercializations but evidence of how rituals adapt when they cross borders, filling emotional needs their original creators never imagined. Then there's yoga's journey from Himalayan caves to suburban studios. The ancient sadhus who developed asanas as spiritual preparation would scarcely recognize today's goat yoga sessions or yoga brunches. Yet this transformation isn't betrayal, it's continuity. Just as Buddhist meditation adapted to Chinese tea ceremonies and Japanese Zen gardens, modern yoga absorbs Western wellness culture while retaining threads of its dharma. Apps might reduce pranayama to stress relief, but the breath still carries echoes of Patanjali's sutras. These living examples demolish the myth that syncretism belongs to history books. In Bali, Hindu offerings sit beside Muslim calligraphy in shop windows without conflict. Mexican Catholics paint their Day of the Dead altars with Buddhist mandala symmetry. Even secular movements like mindfulness repackage Buddhist vipassana into corporate retreats, proving spiritual concepts constantly reinvent themselves to meet new anxieties. What unites these modern blends is their refusal to be static. Haitian Vodou adds iPhone emojis to ritual Vive drawings. Korean shamans livestream gut ceremonies. The Dalai Lama tweets, "This fluidity terrifies fundamentalists of every stripe because it proves faith isn't a sealed artifact but a flowing conversation, one where the participants, not the priests, decide what nourishes their souls." The next time you see a yoga mat beside a Christmas tree or hear gospel music in a Tokyo jazz club, remember, you're witnessing history's oldest survival strategy, dressed in new clothes. Globalization didn't invent cultural blending, it just hit the fast-forward button. Where ancient syncretism unfolded over centuries, today's fusions explode across TikTok feeds and streaming platforms in weeks. Take K-pop's global takeover. BTS Dynamite isn't just Korean pop with English lyrics, it's a sonic collage of 70s disco, modern hip-hop swagger, and traditional Korean pentatonic melodies, all wrapped in production techniques borrowed from Swedish hitmakers. The result, a song that feels simultaneously familiar and exhilaratingly new, topping charts from Seoul to Sao Paulo. This isn't passive absorption, it's active remixing, where artists curate influences like DJs sampling beats. Bollywood's evolution reveals the same hyper-speed hybridization. A single film like RRR might blend Telugu folk dances with Marvel-style CGI spectacle, set to a soundtrack fusing Indian classical ragas with electric guitar riffs. The dialogue, a linguistic masala of Hindi, English, and regional dialects mirroring how Mumbai's Gen Z actually speaks. Unlike the gradual merging of Roman and Egyptian pantheons, these cultural collisions happen in real time, with audiences worldwide voting their approval via streaming numbers and meme recreations before the credits even finish rolling. Language itself is evolving at unprecedented velocity. Japanese teenagers sprinkle Riz slang for charisma from American TikTok into conversations already studded with Portuguese loanwords from Brazil's immigrant communities. Meanwhile, Spanglish isn't just a border phenomenon anymore. It's a global vernacular with reggaeton lyrics like Bad Bunny's flipping between Perio and Yankee so fluidly that Spotify playlists don't bother to categorize them. Even emojis, those universal hieroglyphs of the digital age, reflect this acceleration. The pleading face, means coy flirtation in Korea, earnest begging in America, and is barely used in the Middle East, a single symbol splintering into cultural dialects faster than linguists can track. Culinary borders are dissolving just as rapidly. The sushi burrito might have started as a Los Angeles food truck gimmick, but its DNA now spans continents. Korean chefs stuff them with bulgogi, while London versions feature tandoori spiced salmon. Social media turns local experiments into global trends overnight. A Thai vendor's mango sticky rice kwas goes viral, and within months, Parisian patisseries are riffing on the concept with matcha-infused laminations. These aren't the slow migrations of tomatoes along Silk Road caravans. They're culinary chain reactions, igniting in global foodie group chats before traditional cookbooks can even document them. What makes this era distinct isn't just the speed, but the agency. Ancient syncretism often flowed from conquest or trade imbalances, Roman gods absorbing Egyptian attributes because legions occupied Alexandria. Today's blends are increasingly democratic, driven by individual creators mining Spotify algorithms and YouTube tutorials for inspiration. A teenager in Nairobi can sample Maasai chants over Detroit techno beats, upload it to SoundCloud, and spark a new genre before their parents notice they missed curfew. The barriers to participation have crumbled, letting anyone with a smartphone become a cultural alchemist. Yet this acceleration isn't without tension. When fast fashion brands mass-produce indigenous patterns without context, or when white influencers monetize yoga while South Asian teachers struggle for visibility, it exposes syncretism's thornier modern dilemmas. The difference: social media gives marginalized communities megaphones to call out appropriation, turning cultural exchange into a charged, transparent negotiation rather than a one-way imperial imposition. The same platforms that spread fusion also fuel debates about credit, compensation, and respect, proof that even our blending has become more nuanced. The most exciting part: we're just beginning to see the creative potential of this hyper-connected era. As AI tools let artists mash up flamenco with Cora harp in seconds, and VR concerts dissolve geographic barriers entirely, the next chapter of cultural fusion will make today's remixes look quaint. But the core truth remains unchanged from Gandhara's workshops or Alhambra's tile atol. Yes, human creativity thrives not in isolation, but in the electric space where traditions touch. The internet didn't invent that spark, it just gave it a billion new ways to ignite. Political syncretism might be history's most underrated peacekeeping tool. The European Union's gleaming headquarters in Brussels seem worlds apart from the marble halls of ancient Rome, but their guiding philosophies share a striking kinship. Rome's genius wasn't just military might, it was granting conquered peoples a stake in the system, letting Gauls become senators and Egyptians serve as prefects. Fast forward 2,000 years and the EU's very motto, united in diversity, channels that same pragmatic idealism. When Polish farmers and Portuguese fishermen debate agricultural policy in a room where 24 languages buzz simultaneously, they're reenacting Rome's old playbook, diversity as strength, not weakness. The euro itself is a syncretic masterpiece, Greek-designed coins jingling in German pockets, their shared value transcending borders just as the denarius once did. India's constitution takes this principle further, weaving threads from clashing traditions into a legal tapestry that somehow holds. British common law provides the framework, but its soul is pluralistic. Hindu concepts like dharma inform environmental protections, while Muslim personal law coexists with secular civil codes. The Supreme Court's crest features the Ashoka Chakra, a Buddhist wheel flanked by Sanskrit and Arabic phrases, a silent rebuke to anyone who claims identity must be singular. This isn't just tolerance, it's active synthesis, acknowledging that a nation of 1.3 billion people can't be governed by monochrome ideologies. Flags offer perhaps the most visceral examples of political syncretism. South Africa's banner doesn't just combine colors, it merges histories. The central Y shape nods to both Dutch and indigenous Nguni symbolism, while the palette reconciles ANC liberation hues with the old colonial flag's tone. Rwanda went further after its genocide, ditching divisive red for an optimistic blue and green, with a sun motif inspired by traditional Imigongo art. These designs aren't compromises, they're visual constitutions stitching fractured pasts into shared futures. Even national anthems carry this fusion DNA. Canada's O Canada rings out in French and English, its melody borrowed from a 19th century Quebecois church hymn, but its orchestration pure cinematic grandeur. Bolivia's anthem, sung in Spanish, Quechua, and Aymara, crescendos with indigenous wind instruments alongside European brass, a musical metaphor for layered citizenship. These compositions prove that syncretism isn't about erasing difference but harmonizing it. The lesson for modern policymakers: cohesion doesn't require uniformity. Singapore's ethnic quota system in public housing, forcing Malay, Chinese, and Indian families to live side by side, has quietly prevented ghettoization for decades. New Zealand's parliament opens sessions with both Christian prayers and Maori karakia invocations, recognizing dual spiritual foundations. These aren't perfect systems, but they acknowledge a truth ancient empires understood. Stability comes not from silencing diversity, but channeling it. The next time someone claims multiculturalism is unsustainable, point them to the Roman roads still beneath our feet and the EU trains speeding over them. Resistance to cultural blending often burns brightest where traditions feel most threatened. The Taliban's demolition of the Bamiyan Buddhas in 2001 wasn't just about destroying statues, it was an attempt to erase 1,500 years of Greco-Buddhist fusion, to rewrite history as if Afghanistan's Hellenistic past never existed. Similarly, France's Académie Française wages linguistic trench warfare against le weekend and la hashtag, seeing each borrowed English word as a crack in the fortress of French identity. These purist movements share a core fear that cultural mixing dilutes something essential, some irreducible purity that defines who they are. Yet history shows these battles often backfire spectacularly. When Spain banned Arabic during the Inquisition, Ladino, a Jewish dialect blending Old Spanish with Hebrew and Turkish, flourished in exile, becoming a living archive of medieval Iberia's multiculturalism. Japan's isolationist Edo period couldn't prevent Dutch medical texts from sneaking into Nagasaki, where they merged with traditional Kampo medicine to create hybrid healing practices. Even the most rigid borders prove porous under cultural gravity. North Korea's Juche ideology rails against foreign influence, yet Pyongyang's orchestra recently performed Gangnam Style, complete with carefully denatured K-pop choreography. The irony, attempts to suppress syncretism often create more creative fusions. When British colonizers banned the Hawaiian language, hula dancers encoded forbidden stories in hip movements and hand gestures, turning dance into clandestine literature. Albanian Muslims under communist rule merged Ramadan fasting with harvest moon cycles to avoid detection. These aren't compromises, they're acts of cultural judo, using the weight of oppression to flip restrictions into innovations. Modern examples reveal this dynamic accelerating. Iran's morality police may confiscate satellite dishes, but Persian pop stars in Los Angeles beam music videos into Tehran bedrooms via smuggled flash drives, blending Persian poetry with trap beats. China's Great Firewall can't stop Dao, in creators from remaking banned K-drama plots with nationalist twists. The harder authorities squeeze, the more inventive the workarounds become, like linguistic dandelions sprouting through sidewalk cracks. What purists misunderstand is that cultures have always been palimpsests. The pure French language they defend already contains Celtic, Latin, Frankish, and Arabic layers. The Pashtun identity the Taliban claims to protect was itself shaped by Greek, Persian, and Indian influences over millennia. This tension between preservation and evolution isn't new. It's the fundamental rhythm of human civilization, the creative friction that gives us everything from jazz to quantum physics. The real question isn't whether cultures will mix, but who gets to steer the process. When Maori activists demand that New Zealand's legal system incorporate traditional conflict resolution, or when Inuit filmmakers blend throat singing with electronic music, they're not surrendering tradition, they're expanding its vocabulary. The most resilient cultures aren't those that freeze themselves in time, but those confident enough to absorb and transform, like Kyoto's steel and glass train station rising seamlessly beside thousand-year-old temples. Perhaps the ultimate lesson lies in those Bamiyan cliffs where the Buddhas once stood. Their empty niches now host sound and light shows projected by UNESCO, their absent presence more powerful than any statue. The Taliban tried to erase history, but succeeded only in proving how indelibly fusion marks the human story, and how futile it is to carve it back out. Urban streets have always been laboratories where cultures don't just collide, they conspire. Take Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, where 16th-century Ottoman vaults shelter stalls selling Armenian pottery, Persian carpets, and Turkish coffee brewed with techniques borrowed from Syrian refugees. This isn't just coexistence, it's alchemy where the clatter of tea glasses and the haggling in a dozen dialects fuse into something unmistakably Istanbulite. The city's very skyline narrates this story. Byzantine aqueducts feed Ottoman fountains, while Art Nouveau apartment blocks sport-stained glass crescents alongside Parisian wrought iron balconies. New York's Queens neighborhood offers a contemporary parallel. A single subway ride along the 7 train reveals sari shops stacked with glittering fabrics beside Ecuadorian cevicherias, their menus scrawled in Spanish and Mandarin. The annual Diwali parade down Liberty Avenue features Hindu deities carried by Sikh drummers, while Dominican street vendors sell coconut water to Bengali grandparents. These intersections aren't accidents, they're the inevitable result of urban density, where necessity breeds invention. When a Korean deli owner starts stocking plantains for West African customers, or a Ukrainian baker adapts babka into rainbow-colored Pride Month loaves, they're continuing a tradition as old as cities themselves. Ancient Alexandria perfected this recipe 2,000 years earlier. The great library scholars didn't just collect scrolls, they catalyzed conversations between Egyptian geometry, Jewish mysticism, and Greek philosophy. The city's pharaoh's lighthouse, designed by a Greek architect but built by Egyptian laborers, became the archetype for minarets and medieval church spires alike. Even Alexandria's slang was syncretic, a patois of Greek, Coptic, and Aramaic that let traders from 3 continents argue over spice prices before sharing a flask of date wine. Singapore's hawker centers prove this legacy lives on. Under one steel-roofed pavilion, Hainanese chicken rice, a Chinese dish refined by Malay spices and British colonial kitchen techniques, sits beside fish head curry invented by Tamil cooks for Cantonese diners. The government actively curates this fusion, designating cultural heritage zones where Peranakan shophouses painted in Portuguese inspired pastels house tech startups staffed by Burmese coders and French UX designers. Here, urbanization isn't just a backdrop for cultural exchange. It's an accelerant compressing centuries of organic blending into decades. The magic lies in the unintended creations. In Marseille, North African mint tea met Provençal lavender to create Le Bleu Orange, a hybrid sip served in cafes where Arabic and Occitan slang intertwine. Toronto's Carabana Festival birthed soca punk when Trinidadian steel pan players jammed with Polish garage bands in Parkdale basements. These urban offspring often outlast their parents, London's Cockney rhyming slang, born from immigrant market traders coding their conversations, now peppers Australian surfer slang and Tokyo hip-hop lyrics. Yet cities also reveal syncretism's tensions. When Berlin's Turkish community transformed abandoned factories into Ramadan bazaars selling halal schnitzel, some saw it as innovation, others as erosion. The same Paris arrondissements that inspired Hemingway also birthed bans on cultural appropriation in fashion runways. Urban fusion thrives on this friction, the creative discomfort of identities rubbing raw before they meld. The lesson from these concrete crucibles, true urban syncretism isn't about prettily arranged diversity. It's about friction, adaptation, and the messy beauty of shared survival. When a Mumbai tiffin deliverman bicycles past Art Deco buildings built by Parsi oil barons to drop off lunchboxes containing Goan Vindaloo and Gujarati Dokla to a tech worker raised on McDonald's, he's not just making a delivery, he's spinning another thread in the eternal urban tapestry where all histories belong to everyone. Technology doesn't just connect us, it remixes us. Google Translate might seem like a simple tool for decoding menus or texting abroad, but its algorithms are quietly rewriting the rules of cultural exchange. Every time someone uses it to compose a love letter in broken French or understand a Korean drama without subtitles, they're participating in a linguistic experiment as radical as the Silk Road's pidgin dialects. The app's neural networks don't just swap words, they approximate intent, bending grammar and metaphor to bridge worlds. A Japanese proverb about falling 7 times, rising 8, might emerge in Spanish with the rhythm of a flamenco verse, or in Arabic with the cadence of a Sufi poem. These aren't perfect translations, they're creative acts, digital echoes of how medieval traders mangled each other's tongues into new trade languages like lingua franca. Social media accelerates this blending into hyperdrive. Platforms like TikTok have birthed hybrid slang that would leave linguists dizzy. Puerto Rican teens type Paraguayo, a Spanglish mashup of party and guayo, meaning clueless, while Mumbai gamers reply with Yaru Tamil for who's this. Tossed into Hindi chats, These aren't careless mistakes but conscious choices, identity badges worn by a generation fluent in cultural code switching. When a Nigerian meme combines Yoruba tonal patterns with Atlanta trap lyrics, or a Vietnamese YouTuber narrates cooking tutorials in Vietlish, they're continuing the ancient tradition of linguistic alchemy, just with emoji garnish. AI art generators like Midjourney and DALL-E have turned visual syncretism into a playground. A single prompt, cyberpunk samurai in Gust have Klimt gold leaf, can spawn images that would have taken Renaissance masters and Edo period artisans centuries to imagine collaboratively. These tools don't just copy styles, they hallucinate connections, merging Balinese shadow puppetry with Art Deco geometries, or generating mosque domes that somehow channel Zaha Hadid's futuristic curves. The results sometimes feel uncanny, like digital ghosts of history's unfulfilled artistic dialogues. What if Mughal miniaturists had access to Photoshop? What would Van Gogh's Starry Nights look like filtered through Aboriginal dot painting? AI lets us glimpse those unmade masterpieces, yet this digital blending isn't without friction. When Spotify's algorithms fuse K-pop with Appalachian folk music in personalized playlists, or when Instagram Reels edits Bollywood dances to drill beats, purists cry foul. But isn't this how culture has always evolved? The printing press didn't just standardize vernaculars, it catalyzed creoles, letting Chaucer's English mingle with Norman French until Shakespeare's puns could bloom. The difference now is velocity, where it took generations for Portuguese and Bantu to meld into Angolan Creole. A Korean teen today might absorb Nigerian street slang from a single viral tweet and remix it into a soul hip-hop verse by sundown. The most fascinating twist, these digital fusions are looping back into physical spaces. Augmented reality apps overlay Edo period ukiyo-e onto modern Tokyo alleyways, while language learning bots teach Hawaiian through rap battles. Even fast food gets meta. A Tokyo cafe sells AI-designed pastries blending French patisserie techniques with wagashi aesthetics, their fractal shapes generated by algorithms trained on centuries of cookbooks. This isn't the future, it's the present, proving that human creativity with digital tools can weave cultural threads even the Silk Road never dreamed of. The question isn't whether these blends are authentic, but whether they resonate, and history suggests the most enduring fusions always do. Fashion has always been a silent diplomat, stitching together histories that politics often tears apart. Take the kimono, that iconic Japanese garment with its precise folds and obi sash. When Paul Poit, the Parisian couturier, debuted his kimono coat in 1910, it wasn't mere exoticism. He stripped away the obi, widened the sleeves, and used the structure to liberate Western women from corsets. Decades later, Yves Saint Laurent would reimagine the same lines in his Mondrian dresses, turning Edo-era geometry into swinging 60s mod. Yet this exchange wasn't one-sided. Modern Japanese designers like Rei Kawakubo now deconstruct European tailoring into avant-garde shapes, completing a sartorial conversation that spans centuries. The Scottish kilt tells an even more tangled tale. What we consider traditional Highland dress was actually standardized by English industrialists in the 18th century. Tartan patterns, once banned after the Jacobite rebellions, were repackaged as nostalgic symbols for Victorian tourists. The kilt's pleats might evoke clan pride today, but their global fame owes as much to colonial pageantry as to Gaelic heritage. Meanwhile, in India, the sari's journey reveals similar layers. What began as a simple draped cloth evolved under Mughal rule into ornate brocades, absorbed British lace during the Raj, and now graces runways as chiffon gowns with digital print paisleys. These garments aren't frozen relics, they're living archives of adaptation. African prints dominate contemporary fashion, but their backstory is a masterclass in reinvention. The vibrant Dutch wax fabrics beloved by designers like Stella McCartney actually originated in 19th century Indonesia. Dutch colonists, trying to replicate batik for the Javanese market, accidentally created a new textile that West African soldiers stationed in the Indies brought home. Local artisans then transformed these foreign fabrics into something wholly their own, encoding proverbs and historical events into the patterns. Today, when a Nigerian-British designer like Doro Oluwu mixes Kent cloth with Italian silk, he's continuing a legacy where every stitch speaks multiple languages. Even blue jeans, that universal symbol of Americana, carry hidden fusion DNA. The indigo dye that gives them their hue was first cultivated in India, traded to Europe by Portuguese merchants, then used by French weavers to create denim. Levi-Strauss paired this fabric with copper rivets inspired by Mongolian horse blankets, creating work pants for California gold miners. Now, Japanese selvage denim mills in Okayama perfect vintage American styles, while Brazilian brands add stretch for samba-ready fits. The cycle never ends, only accelerates. Accessories whisper these cross-cultural secrets too. The Panama hat, despite its name, is Ecuadorian, woven from tequila palm by artisans whose techniques predate the Inca. Its global rebranding came from 19th century gold rush workers who bought them in Panama before sailing north. Similarly, the pearl earrings Vermeer painted on Dutch girls were likely harvested by enslaved divers in Venezuela, polished in Germany, and traded through Spanish galleons. Fashion's classics are rarely born classic, they're forged through countless hands and histories. What makes these blended styles so powerful is their ability to carry meaning without words. When Mexican artist Frida Kahlo wore Tijuana dresses with European orthopedic corsets, she turned her body into a manifesto, indigenous pride coexisting with modernist pain. Today's streetwear, kids mixing Air Jordans with Nigerian Adire fabrics or pairing Che Guevara tees with Japanese street snaps, aren't just accessorizing. They're curating identity in real time, proving that the most personal style choices are often the most historically layered. The runway's latest fusion trends, kimono sleeves on power suits, dashikis cut like blazers, aren't radical breaks from tradition. They're the latest verses in an ancient song where every culture borrows the melody but changes the lyrics. Next time you button a shirt or tie a scarf, remember, you're not just getting dressed. You're wearing a map of human connection, one that keeps redrawing its borders with every stitch. Sports are more than games, they're living languages of cultural fusion, spoken with accents as distinct as any dialect. Consider soccer's journey from English boarding schools to the favelas of Rio, where it underwent a breathtaking transformation. The rigid formations and disciplined passes of Victorian football met the rhythmic spontaneity of Afro-Brazilian capoeira, giving birth to what we now recognize as samba soccer. Those signature step-overs and no-look passes aren't just tactics. They're physical poetry, blending European structure with African improvisation in a dance that's quintessentially Brazilian. Pelé's bicycle kicks and Ronaldinho's elastic dribbling didn't emerge from rulebooks. They sprang from the same creative well that gives us Carnival's swirling rhythms and the syncopated beats of bossa nova. The Olympics take this blending to even grander scales. When Baron de Coubertin revived the ancient Greek games in 1896, he couldn't have imagined how thoroughly the modern version would eclipse its origins. The marathon, inspired by a Greek legend, now sees Kenyan and Ethiopian runners dominating the podium, their endurance honed in the highlands of East Africa rather than the hills of Attica. Figure skating's quad jumps incorporate ballet techniques refined in Imperial Russia, while snowboarding's aerial tricks borrow from surfing cultures half a world away. The opening ceremonies have become a masterclass in cultural storytelling, from Beijing's 2008 drummers performing in perfect unison to London's NHS tribute, blending Industrial Revolution imagery with Caribbean carnival vibrancy. What makes sports such powerful vehicles for syncretism is their nonverbal universality. A basketball court in Manila operates on the same basic principles as one in Brooklyn, yet Filipino players have developed a lightning-fast passing style called Pusoy Dos that mirrors local card game strategies. Cricket, once a staid English pastime, became a feverish religion in India and Pakistan, where bowlers developed the dusra, a delivery that spins opposite to physics expectations, much like the subcontinent's own ability to twist colonial legacies into something new. These adaptations aren't deviations from some pure original. They're the natural evolution that occurs when human creativity meets shared rules. The most fascinating transformations happen at the edges of official play. Street soccer in Lagos adapts the game to concrete lots with makeshift goals, producing acrobatic moves that later migrate to Premier League stadiums. Parkour, born from French military obstacle courses, absorbed influences from West African parkour like disciplines like yamakasi to become a global movement language. Even chess, that most cerebral of games, has developed distinct schools of thought, the Soviet emphasis on positional play contrasting with India's explosive attacking style, reflecting deeper cultural approaches to strategy and risk. This constant reinvention proves that sports don't just cross borders, they redraw them. The Japanese baseball term wasuto, waist pitch, enters Spanish commentary as aisuto, while Dominican sluggers redefine what power hitting means. NBA stars now study Euro League footwork, just as European basketball once modeled itself on the American game. These feedback loops create a living archive of cultural exchange, where every crossover dribble and Fosbury flop carries echoes of countless influences. When a Senegalese wrestler incorporates traditional lut moves into Olympic freestyle, or when a Norwegian ski jumper perfects the V-style after studying Japanese aerodynamics, they're participating in humanity's oldest conversation, the one that happens not with words but through the body's universal grammar of motion. The next time you watch a World Cup match or Olympic event, listen beyond the cheers. You'll hear the quiet hum of history being rewritten as athletes become unwitting ambassadors of cultural alchemy, proving that even in competition, our greatest strength lies in what we absorb from one another. History's greatest empires whisper a counterintuitive truth through the ages. The mightiest civilizations weren't fortresses of purity, but living laboratories of cultural exchange. Take Rome's rise from regional power to Mediterranean colossus. It wasn't just legions that expanded their borders, but their very identity. When they adopted the Phrygian goddess Cybele as their magna mater, or refashioned the Greek pantheon into Jupiter and Mercury, they weren't surrendering their culture. They were weaponizing it, turning absorption into a survival strategy. Contrast this with Sparta's obsession with racial purity. Their brutal agoge system produced fearsome warriors, but their rigid rejection of foreign ideas left them without the naval technology to resist Macedonian conquest or the economic flexibility to recover from population decline. The lesson: walls keep others out, but they also lock you in. The Mongols, often remembered as destroyers, perfected this adaptive approach. Genghis Khan's empire thrived precisely because it had no fixed cultural center. Persian administrators ran Chinese provinces, Nestorian Christian scribes recorded Uyghur poetry, and Arab mathematicians taught Mongolian princes. Their capital, Karakorum, was less a city than a crossroads, a place where Tibetan monks debated with Muslim engineers over maps drawn by captured European cartographers. This wasn't just tolerance, it was active intellectual foraging, harvesting the best ideas from every conquered territory to strengthen the whole. While the Mongols' military victories were swift, their true legacy was this ecosystem of exchange that outlasted their rule, seeding innovations from Korean gunpowder to Russian postal systems. Modern anxieties about cultural dilution mirror ancient fears, but history's verdict is clear. The Ottoman Empire's millet system, which allowed Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities to govern their own affairs under imperial protection, sustained their rule for 6 centuries. Meanwhile, Spain's expulsion of Jews and Muslims in 1492 didn't preserve Catholic purity. It drained the peninsula of doctors, financiers, and scholars, triggering an economic decline that took generations to reverse. Even China's Tang dynasty, at its zenith, thrived by embracing foreign influences. Persian dancers performed in Chang'an streets, Sogdian merchants introduced new musical scales, and Buddhist sutras translated into Chinese birthed philosophical schools unlike anything seen in India or Tibet. What does this mean for today's fractured world? The Silicon Valleys and Dubais of our era, places where Indian coders brainstorm with Israeli entrepreneurs under Finnish-designed roofs, are the new Karakorums. They thrive not despite diversity, but because of it. When Denmark's ghetto laws try to ban immigrant enclaves or when nationalist movements demand linguistic purity, they're replaying Sparta's losing strategy. The alternative isn't surrender, but selective synthesis, like Japan's adoption of Western constitutional governance while preserving Shinto values, or Rwanda's post-genocide embrace of English and Swahili alongside Kinyarwanda to forge economic bridges. The myth of cultural purity crumbles under scrutiny. Even the most traditional practices are palimpsests. The bagpipes, synonymous with Scotland, originated in ancient Anatolia, while the all-American cowboy hat descended from Mexican sombreros. This fluidity isn't a threat to identity. It's the very mechanism by which identities evolve and endure. The empires we remember weren't time capsules but rivers, constantly fed by new tributaries growing deeper as they flowed. In an age of resurgent nationalism, this ancient truth offers more than insight. It offers hope. The future, like the past, belongs not to those who build walls, but to those who build bridges, understanding that every culture is itself a bridge, spanning from what came before to what's yet to be. From the Silk Road's camel caravans to TikTok's algorithm-driven dance crazes, one truth echoes across the centuries. Cultures don't flourish in isolation, they thrive through connection. That bowl of ramen you love, its noodles trace back to Chinese wheat recipes adapted by Japanese chefs using Portuguese frying techniques. The reggaeton beat pulsing through your headphones. A Puerto Rican remix of Panamanian reggae, Jamaican dancehall, and American hip-hop. Even the device in your hand, designed in California, assembled in Vietnam, with chips engineered by Indian software, is a testament to humanity's endless ability to blend and rebuild. This isn't just about borrowing, it's about reinvention. When Venetian merchants first encountered Arabic numerals, they didn't merely adopt them. They fused them with Roman accounting systems to create modern finance. Jazz didn't emerge from New Orleans by accident. It was the explosive collision of West African rhythms, French military band instruments, and Appalachian folk harmonies. Every breakthrough, from the printing press to the COVID vaccine, has been a team effort spanning continents and generations. The myth of the lone genius is just that, a myth. Progress has always been a chorus, not a solo. Yet today's hyper-connected world presents both promise and peril. While algorithms can introduce us to Thai street food blogs or Sami Joik singing, they can also flatten nuance into viral trends, stripping traditions of context. The challenge isn't to resist blending that's as futile as resisting the tides, but to engage consciously. When a Swedish fashion brand collaborates with Maori weavers, does it credit their artistry or exploit it? When K-pop idols incorporate Native American headdresses, is it homage or appropriation? The line between celebration and erasure is often drawn by who holds the pen and who shares the profits. History offers guidance here too. The Mughal emperors didn't just borrow Persian miniature painting, they elevated local artists to create the transcendent Taj Mahal. Moorish Spain's golden age flourished because Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars translated each other's texts rather than burning them. These weren't utopias, they were messy, imperfect experiments in coexistence that nonetheless expanded human possibility. Their lesson, diversity without equity, is just decoration. So what's next? Perhaps the metaverse will birth hybrid rituals we can't yet imagine, digital Diwali lanterns in VR temples, or AI-generated ghazals blending Urdu and coding languages. Maybe climate crises will force nomadic knowledge and urban tech into new survival syntheses, like Inuit ice wisdom guiding floating cities. Whatever emerges will undoubtedly surprise us because cultural alchemy always does. As you swipe through global memes or order kimchi tacos tonight, remember, you're not just a consumer of culture, you're a creator of it. Every playlist you curate, every slang phrase you adopt, every tradition you reinterpret adds another stitch to humanity's grand, ever-evolving tapestry. The question isn't whether cultures will keep merging, but how we can steer this process toward justice and joy. After all, the future, like the past, won't be built by purists, it'll be forged by the curious, the bold, and the bridge builders. Want to help write the next chapter? Hit reply. Your voice belongs in this ancient, endless conversation.